Pull your chair a little closer to the fire, my friends. I have a story for you tonight, one that I have been carrying around for some time now, turning over in my mind the way you turn over a smooth stone in your pocket. It is a story about a recital, and a screen, and a chair that was moved by a man who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply refuse to stay where they have been placed. Edinburgh, January 1817. The house on Moray Place belonged to Lord and Lady Wexham, and in the winter season, it was one of the most sought-after addresses in the city. Lady Wexham was a woman of considerable social intelligence, and she managed her drawing room with the precision of someone who understood that every arrangement, every placement, every distance, every angle was a statement. She had been making these statements for 25 years. She had never yet made one accidentally. Miss Daphne Holloway understood this the moment she entered the drawing room on the evening of the recital. It took her perhaps 6 seconds to read the room. The chairs had been arranged in a curved horseshoe, open at one end toward the pianoforte. The front row was for family, the Wexham daughters, arranged prettily, their spines straight with the particular alertness of young women who know they are being observed. Behind them, the guests of consequence. Lady Carrick and her husband, the Dalrymple cousins, the venerable Mrs. Baird, who had been attending Edinburgh's best drawing rooms since before Napoleon had been anyone worth worrying about, and at the back of this horseshoe, half tucked behind the large decorative screen. The one Lady Wexham had brought from London, the one with the painted herons, a pair of chairs that had been arranged not for viewing but for accommodating. One of those chairs had Sir Archibald Penny's walking stick resting against it. The other had a small programme card on its seat, written in the Wexham housekeeper's hand. Miss Holloway. She looked at it for a moment. She picked it up. She sat down. The placement was not a mistake. Nothing Lady Wexham arranged was a mistake. Sir Archibald appeared a few minutes later, making his slow way around the edge of the room with the patience of a man who has been making his slow way around the edges of rooms for the better part of a decade. He was 78, still sharp as a Scottish winter in his mind, but his right knee had been giving him considerable difficulty since the autumn, and his right eye had never been what anyone would call reliable. He found his chair, lowered himself into it with the careful competence of someone who has made a study of sitting safely, and looked at Miss Holloway beside him with the particular expression of a man who has not expected to find anyone actually sitting there. "You are the young woman who teaches the Wexham girls," he said. It was not unfriendly, it was simply precise. "French and drawing," she said. "Miss Holloway." "Penny," he said. "Retired. Court of Session long ago." He paused. "They put me back here because I knocked over a lamp at the Dalrymple concert in December, my right side." He indicated his eye. "Can't judge distances as I used to." "I am sorry about your eye," she said. "Bah," he said, with the breezy dismissal of a man at peace with his inconveniences. "I am sorry about the screen. You can barely see the pianoforte from here." "I can hear it perfectly well," she said. He looked at her with the slow approval of someone recalibrating. "That is a reasonable approach," he said. "What do you know about Scarlatti?" She told him. He brightened immediately in the way of a person who has not been asked what they know about anything for quite some time, and the conversation moved from Scarlatti to Rameau to the particular qualities of a Rucker's harpsichord that Sir Archibald had once, in 1784, if memory served, heard played by a man who had shaken the hand of someone who had shaken the hand of someone who had known Bach. They were in this quite content. Now, my friends, you might be wondering about the chair at the front of the room. The one to the right of Lady Wexham's, the one that had been left empty through the first quarter hour of the evening with the particular empty quality of a chair that is not simply unoccupied but reserved. That chair was for Viscount Stirling. Lord Stirling arrived at 20 minutes past 7 with the unhurried composure of a man who has attended enough evenings in enough cities to know that arriving late to a recital in Edinburgh is not a social catastrophe. He was 36 years old, returned that autumn from 4 years where he had served in a diplomatic capacity during negotiations that required the specific skill of sitting very quietly in rooms full of people who were not saying what they meant. He had developed in those 4 years a considerable ability to observe. He was not, as people sometimes supposed, cold. He was simply watching. He took his seat. He exchanged the necessary courtesies with Lady Wexham. He turned his attention to the room. He noticed the screen almost immediately. He noticed it the way he noticed things, not with visible reaction, but with the slow, complete attention of a man filing information for later consideration. He noted its position. He noted the chairs behind it. He noted that one of those chairs was occupied by Sir Archibald Penny, whom he recognized from his father's time, and that the other was occupied by a young woman he did not know, who was leaning slightly toward the old man with the attentiveness of someone genuinely listening. He looked at Lady Wexham. He looked at the screen. He looked at the woman who had been placed behind it. He reached for his wine, and might prove more interesting than he had anticipated. The recital began at 7:30. The performer was the eldest Wexham daughter, who played with real skill and perhaps 10% more feeling than the music required, which is a very common condition in accomplished young women at private recitals and is no criticism at all. The pieces were well chosen. The room settled into that particular drawing-room quiet that is not quite silence and not quite attention, but somewhere in between. Miss Holloway listened. Behind the screen, she could see perhaps 2/3 of the keyboard and none of the performer's face, but the sound came through clearly. And she had always preferred listening with her eyes closed anyway. So the screen was in that sense no particular hardship. It was during the third piece that Mrs. Calder made her remark. Mrs. Calder was a woman of confident opinions and a Mayfair address, visiting Edinburgh for the season with the specific energy of a person who wishes to demonstrate that Edinburgh's society, while charming, is not quite London. She had been seated in the second row, which was an accurate reflection of her position in the room, and she made her remarks with the ease of a person who believes that speaking with confidence is equivalent to speaking with knowledge. She said, during the pause between movements, just loudly enough to carry, that she had heard this particular sonata performed in London 2 seasons ago, and that the attribution to Paradies was almost certainly wrong. She had it on excellent authority that the piece was composed by a student of Clementi, whose style one could recognize if one had had the benefit of hearing the master's own work. The room received this with the polite attentiveness that greets confident musical opinion at private recitals. Miss Holloway, behind the screen, set down her program. She knew this sonata. She knew it because her father, the Reverend Holloway of Dumfries, had owned a small collection of musical correspondence that he had purchased from a bookseller 30 years ago. And among those letters was one written by Pietro Domenico Paradies himself in his own hand, to a friend in Scotland, referencing this specific work. She had read that letter so many times that she could have recited it. She knew the attribution was correct. She said from behind the screen, in the clear and even voice of a person stating a fact, "I believe the attribution is accurate, Mrs. Calder. The sonata is Paradies. There is a letter in his own hand that confirms it." The room went still. Mrs. Calder turned. She looked toward the screen with the expression of a woman recalibrating the source of an interruption. She found the source. She recalibrated further. "How interesting," she said, with the particular smile of a woman who knows how to deploy interest as a weapon. The drawing tutor has opinions on musical provenance. The silence that followed was the wrong kind. It was not the silence of people considering new information. It was the silence of a room that has just been reminded of a hierarchy, and is waiting to see how the hierarchy holds. From his chair at the front, Lord Stirling had not moved. He had, in the 2 years he spent in Vienna, attended a lecture given by a student of Paradis contemporary, and he had, during that lecture, heard the sonata in Quefretwet, and man by name and by attribution. He knew Miss Holloway was correct. He had known it from the moment Mrs. Calder spoke. He set down his wine-glass. He stood. He crossed to his chair. He lifted it. Unhurriedly, without any particular drama, the way a man lifts a chair when he has decided where he intends to sit, and he carried it to the back of the room. He moved around the edge of the screen. He placed his chair beside Miss Holloway's chair, on the open side, where the room could see him. He sat down. He looked at the room with the composed expression of a man who has arrived at exactly the place he intended to be. "Mrs. Calder," he said with the measured calm of 4 years of diplomatic service, "I heard this sonata attributed to Paradis by a musicologist in Vienna who had handled the original manuscript. Miss Holloway is correct." He paused. "The acoustics from this side of the screen are, I find, considerably better. If you have found your way to this story tonight, my friends, if you have pulled up a chair and are listening by the warmth of whatever fire is nearest to you, I would ask you to stay a little longer. Subscribe to Moonlight at Ravenwood if you haven't yet, and come back for the evenings ahead. There are more stories waiting, and some of them end even better than this one. Now, back to Edinburgh, back to the screen and the chair that was moved, and the room that did not quite know what to do with itself." The silence that followed Lord Stirling's words was a different kind of silence entirely. It was the silence of 30 people who have received 2 things simultaneously: a correction delivered with unimpeachable authority, and the rather remarkable sight of a viscount carrying his own chair to the back of the room and sitting beside the drawing tutor. The silence did its processing in the space of approximately 4 seconds, and then the recital continued, because drawing-room recitals in Edinburgh continue regardless of what happens in the chairs. Mrs. Calder recovered with the speed of long social practice and the composure of someone who has decided to behave as though the last 3 minutes did not occur. Sir Archibald, who had missed most of the preceding exchange due to a general absorption in his own thoughts about the Scarlatti they had discussed earlier, noticed Lord Stirling's arrival beside him with enormous pleasure. "Stirling," he said, "good man, sit down, we were discussing Scarlatti." "Were you?" said Lord Stirling. "Before the music started. Miss Holloway knows a great deal about Scarlatti." He looked at her with the candor of a man who pays compliments as simply as he states facts. She knows a great deal about most things, as it turns out. Lord Stirling looked at Miss Holloway. She was looking at her programme. There was in her face the particular quality of composure that is not the absence of feeling but its careful management. She was not flushed. She was not stiff. She had received what had just happened, the remark, the correction, the chair, all of it, with the same steady attention she brought to everything. He thought, "She is very good at this," he thought. "She has had a great deal of practice." In the corridor after the recital, while the drawing-room behind them resumed the social work of restoring what had briefly been rearranged, Lord Stirling found her. She had collected her wrap and was making her way toward the servants' stairs. Because her position did not require the full drawing-room restoration, and she had learned in 18 months at Wexham House that the quicker she removed herself from the social aftermath, the easier the following morning became. "Miss Holloway," he said. She stopped. She turned. He was standing in the corridor with the expression she had observed across the recital room. Not the social management expression he had worn for most of the evening, but the other one. The one that was not performing anything. "Lord Stirling," she said. "You did not have to speak up," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "No," she said, "but I found I couldn't leave it." "Why?" She considered this with the honest deliberateness of someone who does not give quick answers to real questions. Because it was wrong, she said. Not wrong in a way that harmed only ideas, wrong in a way that would have stood. If no one corrected it, it would have become the version of events that people repeated. Mrs. Calder would have told it in London. The attribution would have travelled with her version attached to it. She paused. I had the correct information. The position I hold in this house does not disqualify me from knowing something true. He was quiet for a moment. Most people would have let it pass, he said. I know, she said. I considered it. And I decided that the letter my father kept was worth something, even from behind a screen. He looked at her. The whole direct attention of him, which was, she had already understood, not a small thing. Your father kept correspondence, he said. He was a minister of the old school, she said. He believed that a library was a form of conversation across time. He left me his books and his letters when he died, and very little else, but the very little else included the Paradise correspondence, and I have read it enough times that I could not sit quietly while it was contradicted. He was in Dumfries. Yes, she said. He died 3 years ago, before he could arrange things as he had hoped. She said it without self-pity, with the specific plainness of a woman who has made her peace with the distance between what was planned and what arrived. He heard this in the plainness, and understood it was not an invitation to sympathy. You moved your chair, she said. It came out quieter than she had intended. Yes, he said. Lady Wexham will have thoughts about that. I expect she will, he said, with an absence of particular concern that she found, against her better judgment, entirely compelling. It will complicate things for me, she said. Specifically for me, not for you. I know, he said. I thought about that before I stood up. She looked at him. And I stood up, he said. They stood in the corridor for a moment, with the sounds of the drawing-room faint behind them, the gas lamps making warm pools on the floor between them, the servant's stairs 10 feet ahead of her, and the whole weight of tomorrow already beginning to gather. I would like to call, he said, tomorrow if you are willing. She thought about the screen and the chair, and the letter her father had kept in his study in Dumfries for 30 years. She said, I have a lesson at 10 o'clock and another at noon. 11, he said. 11, she said. She went up the stairs. He went back toward the drawing-room. And the evening stakeable air of woman continued, in the way that evenings continue, and neither of them was thinking about the recital anymore. He came at 11 the next morning. Lady Wexham had, in the intervening hours, assembled her response. A response built on 25 years of managing this particular drawing-room and the people who moved through it. It involved a certain coolness at the breakfast table, a pointed arrangement of the morning's schedule, and the quiet implication that the music room where Miss Holloway her lessons was, this morning, in use. It was not in use. Miss Holloway was in it. She had been in it since 9 o'clock. Lord Stirling's card arrived at the music room door at 5 minutes past 11. Carried by the youngest footman with the slightly stunned expression of a young man who has just been told to take a Viscount's calling card to the back of the house. He was shown in. The music room at Wexham House was a practical room, good north light, 2 tall windows overlooking the garden, bookshelves built for music scores that had expanded, over Miss Holloway's tenure, to include a small but considered collection of history and correspondence accumulated by way of gifts from her students' families and her own modest savings. It was, in short, a room that looked like someone actually lived and worked in it. Lord Stirling stood in the doorway and looked at it, with the expression of a man noticing something he hadn't arranged to notice. This is a good room, he said. I have spent a great deal of time in it, she said. He sat in the student's chair, the plain one across from the pianoforte, not the upholstered one by the window, with the naturalness of a man who makes a point of not making a point of where he sits. He looked at the bookshelves. The Paradise letter, he said. Is it here? She stood and took a slim folio from the second shelf, the one with the faded spine that no one would have looked at twice. She handed it to him without ceremony. He opened it, he read it. He was quiet for a moment with the quality of silence that is not empty but occupied. "Your father purchased this," he said, "from a bookseller in Perth in 1789, for what was apparently a ridiculous sum that annoyed my mother considerably." A brief lightness moved across her face. He was right, and she was right. And the two of them managed to remain on good terms about it, which I always thought was one of the better achievements of their marriage. He looked at her. "How long have you been in this position?" 18 months, she said. "And before that?" "I managed," she said. "After my father died, there was a period of managing. A cousin's household in Perthshire, a brief, unpleasant situation in Stirlingshire that I will not go into. And then Lady Wexham, who needed someone with French, and had heard I was not the sort of person who caused difficulty." She said this last phrase with the dry precision of someone aware of the particular irony it now carried. "I have been, on the whole, not the sort of person who causes difficulty. Last night was an anomaly." "I would not call it that," he said. "No," she said, "I don't suppose you would." They spoke for nearly an hour. About the letter, and her father's library, and the particular quality of Scottish winter light that made the music room feel, on mornings like this one, almost warm. He had been to Dumfries once, years ago, and described it with the slightly apologetic accuracy of a man who had not paid it sufficient attention on the visit, and was only now, in retrospect, understanding that he should have. She told him about the church where her father had preached for 30 years, and the way the congregation had sung on Christmas morning, and how she had learned French from a Belgian émigré who had come to the parish in 1798, and stayed because, as he said, Scotland was cold, but it was honest. At 5 minutes to noon he rose to leave. "I will call again," he said at the door, "if you are willing." She looked at him, Lady Wexham. "I know," he said. He said it without the dismissal she might have expected. He said it with the full weight of a man who knows exactly what he is saying he knows. "I find I am less interested in Lady Wexham's arrangements than I was at the beginning of yesterday's evening." "That is easy to say," she said, with the honesty she had stopped apologizing for somewhere around the age of 23. "It is," he said. "I said it anyway." He looked at her for a moment. "Thursday." She said, "Thursday." The weeks that followed were careful weeks. He called on Thursday. He called the Monday after. He sent a small volume on the Italian keyboard composers, not new, but a good edition, with handwritten marginalia from a previous owner who had clearly been engaged in a long argument with the author across decades of rereading. Inside the front cover he had written only, Chapter 4. The argument on page 89 is wrong, but interestingly so, Stirling. She read Chapter 4 that evening. She read page 89. She stayed up past midnight composing her rebuttal, which she sent back with the volume the following morning, and which he returned, with his counter-rebuttal, by Thursday. This is, my friends, how some love affairs begin, not with declarations, with page 89. Lady Wexham rearranged herself around these developments with the pragmatic intelligence of a woman who has managed a household long enough to know when a situation has exceeded her management. She did not invite Lord Stirling to reconsider his attentions. She understood, in the way of a woman with good social instincts, that the inviting would accomplish nothing. She observed the volume of music going back and forth. She observed the calls, and the unmistakable air on. She observed the way the girls reported with the particular wide-eyed interest of young women, noticing something for the first time, that Miss Holloway had been seen laughing in the music room. And the unmistakable air of a woman. She called Miss Holloway to the sitting room one morning, and looked at her with the expression of a woman who has arrived at the edge of something she did not plan for. "Viscount Stirling," Lady Wexham said, "is a man of considerable family." "Yes," said Miss Holloway. "You understand what his family will require." "I understand it entirely," said Miss Holloway. "I am also aware of what I am in this house. I don't believe you need to explain either of these things to me." Lady Wexham looked at her. There was in that look something that had not been present in any of the previous 18 months. It was not warmth, exactly. It was closer to the specific recalibration of a woman encountering something that has outgrown her architecture. "He moved his chair," Lady Wexham said. "Yes," said Miss Holloway. "In 25 years of managing drawing rooms," Lady Wexham said slowly, "I have never seen a man of his position move his chair." Miss Holloway said nothing. "He did not consult me," Lady Wexham said. It was not quite a complaint. It was the statement of a woman acknowledging a factor she did not anticipate and cannot retroactively arrange. "No," said Miss Holloway, "he did not." Lady Wexham was quiet for a long moment. Then, with the specific dignity of a woman making a concession she has not made before, and knows she is not likely to make again, "He is coming on Tuesday. I will see to it that the morning room is available." It was not an apology. Lady Wexham was not a woman who issued apologies, but it was a door opened, which for a woman who had spent 25 years managing which doors remained closed was, perhaps, the same thing. Miss Holloway said, "Thank you." He came on a Tuesday in March, not a Thursday. He came in the morning, with the expression of a man who has been thinking carefully and has arrived at the point past, which careful thinking has done all it can do. He spoke to Lady Wexham for 20 minutes in the morning room. She made the resistance that a lifetime of social conviction required her to make. She made it with dignity, and she conceded, as she had already calculated she would, at the conclusion he had intended from the beginning. Then he was shown to the music room. Miss Holloway was at the pianoforte. She had known he was coming, not because she had been told, but because she had been paying attention for 6 weeks, and she had come to understand the shape of his decisions. He came in. He sat in the student's chair, the same one he had sat in the first day, as though he had never used any other. "Lady Wexham has agreed," he said. She set down the piece of music she was holding. "My father is gone," she said. "There is only me to consult." "I know," he said. "I am asking you." She looked at him. She looked at the room, the good light, the letter in its folio on the second shelf, the volume on Italian composers with the argument on page 89, the schedule of lessons on the desk. "You should understand," she said, "that I will not be quiet." "I noticed," he said. "I have been quiet in this house because my position required it. That is not my nature. I will have opinions about things, and I will say them, and I will not always wait to be asked." "I had gathered that from the screen incident," he said. Something moved in his face, not quite a smile, but the clear preparation for one. "And I will continue to teach," she said. "I have students who depend on their lessons, and I will not abandon them without proper arrangement." "I would not ask you to," he said. She looked at him. She looked at the chair. He had carried across the recital room, which she had been carrying in her mind for 6 weeks, like a letter she couldn't quite put down. She said very quietly, as though to no one in particular, "He moved his chair." And then she said yes. She left Wexham House on a morning in April when the light on Moray Place had the particular quality of early spring light in Edinburgh. Tentative, but genuine, she carried her books, her father's folio, and the volume on Italian composers, which was at this point so thoroughly annotated in 2 different hands that it had become something else entirely. Sir Archibald Penny had sent a note the previous week, in his large, careful handwriting, that said only, "I have heard the news. Good. You were always too good for the back of that screen. AP." She had laughed. She had kept the note. Lady Wexham was not in the entrance hall. She was in her sitting room, which was the arrangement that permitted her to manage the morning correctly. Miss Holloway respected this. She had always respected the things that were managed correctly, even when they came late. The Wexham girls were at the front door. The eldest pressed her hand and said nothing, because she was old enough to understand the situation and young enough not yet to have the words for it. The youngest, who was 11, said, "Will you come back and teach me?" Miss Holloway said, "I will come back and teach you." She meant it. Lord Stirling was at the street with the carriage. He had come himself, not sent the carriage alone, but come, which was a statement that required no elaboration. He handed her in, he got in beside her, the carriage moved. She looked out the window at the house on Moray Place as it reduced itself to a door, a facade, a corner, nothing. He said beside her, "Regrets?" "No, that we're not already there," she said. The carriage turned and Edinburgh opened around them. The grey stone, the castle on its rock, the city going about its April morning with the complete indifference of a city that has been here since before anyone living can remember and expects to be here long after. "Sir Archibald's roses," she said presently. "What about them?" He was concerned about the west wall. He said it doesn't get enough sun. She paused. He has been planning an adjustment since last October, and no one has listened to him about it. Lord Stirling was quiet for a moment. Then, "I will look at it when we visit." She turned to look at him. "You intend to visit Sir Archibald?" "Regularly," he said. He looked out the window with the quality of something warmer than the recital room's careful composure. "He is extremely good company, as you correctly identified. And he has, I find, a great deal to say about roses." She looked at him with the full, unmanaged warmth of a woman who has stopped being careful. "He does," she said. "You have no idea." The carriage rolled on. The city went about its business, and inside that small moving world, two people who had found each other on the wrong side of a painted screen sat in the easy quiet of people who know where they are going and are glad of it. She thought he moved his chair. She thought, "I am so very glad of it." And perhaps, dear friends, that is the thing about this story that will not let it go. Not the correction delivered from behind a screen, or the chair carried across the full width of a recital room, or even the careful weeks of an argument conducted through the margins of a musicology text. It is the simpler thing beneath all of it. A man in a room full of people managing the social geography of rank and position, who decided that the correct response to that geography was to pick up his chair and walk to where the truth was. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. She had spoken from behind a screen because she could not leave a true thing unsaid. He had moved across a room because he could not leave a deliberate slight unchallenged. And the rest, the letter on page 89, the lesson at 11 o'clock, the April morning in the carriage, all of it followed from those two small, indelible decisions. Sometimes that is all it is, my dear friends. Two people in the same room, one of them placed where she should not be, and the other deciding that the correct response is not to stay where he has been put. Come back to Moonlight at Ravenwood. There are more evenings ahead, more stories waiting by the fire, and I will be here when you return. Until then, good night.